Hello everyone, so this is an explanation of the four-source theory. So this relates to our study of the Second or New Testament, and it relates to the Synoptic Gospels. Only the Synoptic Gospels. Now the four-source theory talks about the composition of Matthew and Luke. It does not talk about the composition of Mark. It tells us one thing and one thing only about Mark, and that is that Mark came first. So, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke used primarily two sources, and they are the Gospels of Mark and a thing we call Q. Now, Q stands for quell, and we call it the Q source, which is silly, because quell in German means source, so it's the source. Now, what Q is a hypothetical document that is a list of the sayings of Jesus. We do not have Q. In a second, once I've drawn out the core of the diagram, I'll tell you how we get Q. So, we have the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Now, they both contain all of Mark. Almost word for word. They change some of his stories. Mark is a very suffering, passionate, very raw gospel. Matthew and Luke tone him down a lot and change a bit here and there to fit their own theologies, their own Christologies. But they use all of Mark, so it can be found inside these. So, let's get a different colour. Mark is in Matthew and Luke. Now, Q, as I said, is a hypothetical document. There are things that are the same in Matthew and Luke that are not in Mark. Now, we don't think that Matthew and Luke knew each other. I'll tell you in a second why. We get Q by taking all the things that are the same from Matthew and Luke that are not in Mark and taking them out and putting them into this hypothetical document. Was there more in Q? There may have been. We know that sayings gospels exist because the Gospel of Thomas is a sayings gospel. The Gospel of Thomas is another matter entirely in some ways, but it is proof that these things did in fact exist. So, all of Q can be found in Luke and Matthew. We know that Matthew and Luke, or we believe that Matthew and Luke did not know each other because there are really awesome stories that are in both of these that are not in both of them. So Matthew has some incredible stories about Jesus that are not in Luke, and Luke has some incredible stories that are not in Matthew. And you've got to think, if I were writing a gospel and I knew these stories, I'd be an idiot not to include them. They are really powerful, beautiful, incredible stories. They're amazing. So we think that if Matthew and Luke knew each other, they would have swapped these stories, they would have used them in their gospels. So we don't believe that they knew each other at all. So Matthew and Luke completely separate. That's how we understand Mark and Q from that. They didn't share information that we believe is in Q. Now, this here is the two-source hypothesis, because it says that Matthew and Luke use two sources, Mark and Q. But we're talking about the four-source theory. What the four-source theory says is that Matthew and Luke, they had to get these incredible stories from somewhere. They got them from their traditions of their own communities. So we have what we call the Matthean community and the Lucan community. So they used the traditions that their own communities were familiar with. Where did those traditions come from? Well, they probably came down to them from oral tradition, from other little documents, various teachings that were floating around their area of the Christian world at the time. So there we have Matthean and Lucan communities. This here then, that's very faint, I'm sorry. This here then, like that doesn't work, I'm going to use a black pen, is source theory. There we are. So, four source theory because Matthew and Luke used 1, 2, 3, 4 sources. Realistically, it's a little bit silly because Matthew and Luke each really only used 3 sources, but there are 4 sources in the diagram. Outside of that theory, we also have a Mark and community. Now, remember, this does not come into the theory. But for your own visualization, Mark did not randomly come up with ideas. They were passed down to the author of Mark from their community. So always remember there is a Mark and community. And again, the author of Mark writing for a community, using the stories that the community was familiar with and other things that he had at his disposal, which came down to all of them. So I hope that